You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Two stories that have captivated the nation. The Covington High School students being ambushed by an Indian, Nathan Phillips, and by the mainstream media. We talked about this some last week, and there's a lot more to get into about that today, and the media narrative of the story, and doing the job that the media just can't seem to do, which is tell the truth. Also, media bias, what that means for not just this story, but the other stories that have been going on as well. Also, the New York abortion bill. Oh, do I have a lot to say about that. And hopefully we will have a guest on later in the program to discuss that. And Chick-fil-A. Leftists now call Chick-fil-A a white supremacist, imperialist, capitalist cult. Wow. Okay, that's going to be an interesting story to dissect, and we will discuss all of it right now. Oh, it's going to be one of those days. Hello, America. Welcome to the Blake Johnson program. I am your host, Blake Johnson, and I have been itching to get behind this microphone today and talk to you about some of the huge stories that have been taking place, and stories that we have mentioned some last week, but have developed in a way that I just naively didn't really think would happen. Didn't envision it going this way. And I should have. We will get to that and try to dive into all of it. I mean, we've got a lot to talk about today. Also, as I said just a second ago, hoping to have a special guest on later in the broadcast to talk more about the New York abortion bill, one of the most evil bills that has ever been passed, in my opinion. And we will talk about that, and I may mention some of it before the bottom of the hour. But I want to talk about this Covington High School news story. For those of you who didn't get to the show last week, we talked a bit about it, and this basically is what happened. So these groups of students from Covington High School, they were at this, I think they were in D.C., and there were some protests going around, and there was a video that was released on, I think it was Twitter, and it was an edited video, severely edited video, showing that the Covington High School students, they were Trump supporters. It's a Catholic high school. They were wearing red Make America Great Again hats, and the video that was shown was one of them, Sandman, I believe is his last name. And it was a confrontation between him and this guy by the name of Nathan Phillips, a Marine veteran, but the media was labeling him as a Vietnam veteran. And I will get to that in just a second. But they made it look like this Trump supporter, this white Christian guy, was ambushing this Native American who was playing his drum, and the group of students were surrounding him. But unfortunately for the media, that narrative didn't hold up. What actually happened, and I think this whole video is on YouTube, it's about 2 hours, it shows the entire thing from beginning to end. And it was in fact not just Nathan Phillips who approached the Covington kids. It was this group, they're like the black Jews, or the black, I can't remember the name of it, but they're, even by the Southern Poverty Law Center standards, are labeled a militant extremist group. When the Southern Poverty Law Center is labeling you as extremist, you're pretty darn extreme. But they were the ones approaching these kids, calling them the F word for homosexuals, calling them basically every hate-filled name you can think of. Racist, homophobe, all these horrible, horrible names. But that wasn't reported by the media, at first anyway. And some of them have issued retractions. Some of them have. And the media narrative was, oh, look at these awful, white Christian Trump supporters. Look at what they're doing to this poor man, this Vietnam veteran, this guy who served his country. Look what they're doing to him. But again, when the actual facts came out, it showed that's not what happened at all. It's not. And this kid was shown smiling. He was shown smiling. Oh, how dare you even smile at this guy as he's banging his drum right in front of you. How dare you smile? And it made it look like he was mocking him. Well, in an interview with Good Morning America, I believe it was, Sandman, this kid, says, no, I wasn't mocking him. I was trying to diffuse the situation and show that no matter what he and those other groups were doing, we weren't going to give in. We weren't going to be part of this divisive, hate-filled rhetoric. Now, there were reports that one of the kids said something really awful about rape. Said it's not rape if you enjoyed it, or something like that. And it turns out the person who said that doesn't even go to the school. So that narrative didn't work either. But let's just step back here for just a second. I know a lot of different talk shows have approached this topic. I know a lot of different talk shows are talking about this story, and it's important. And I try to approach things I try to cover different news stories that maybe the media isn't quite focusing much on. But this story is very important. It's one that every American should be discussing, whether you're right or left. This is just another example of how awful our discourse has become. And when I say our discourse, I'm referring to the media. Because even I, with what little presence I have, is still broadcasting. I'm still trying to put some kind of media out there for people to digest. Now, I'm not a journalist. I don't pretend to be truly unbiased because I'm not. I have my own biases, and I try to put those out there for all of you to know and to see and to decide whether or not you agree with it or not. However, so many in both the media and the Washington Post and the New York Times, several different journalists like Jake Tapper, people like S.E. Cupp from, is it MSNBC or CNN, one of those two. Many of these outlets, news anchors, so on and so forth, quickly jumped on this story and just immediately assumed that this was the whole story. But one of the first rules in media is that there's always more to the story. There's always more to the story. You have to get all of the facts before jumping to a conclusion. The conclusion has to be evidence-based. And it's clear from all of this that there was not evidence-based. So you ask yourself, well, why did they do this? Why did so many people jump on this? Even some on the right jumped on this and were criticizing the Covington High School students. Well, as far as the left is concerned, this is one of the reasons why they jumped on this and why they immediately assumed that the Covington High School kids were evil, racist bigots. Courtesy of Joy Behar.
So many people admitted they made snap judgments before these other facts came in. Why do we keep making the same mistake and then have to walk stuff back when it turns out we're wrong?
Because we're desperate to get Trump out of office. And so it's wishful thinking.
And that's exactly right. They want to get Donald Trump out of office. And I don't think it's just about that, but I think that plays a big role in why they jumped all over this story and they immediately made their own conclusions without really checking into the facts, because they were wearing the evil red hat. And how dare you wear that racist hat? I mean, after all, there was a Catholic bishop that came out and said, yeah, this hat, it's evil and it doesn't make you pro-life. Still criticizing these kids for wearing that hat. It's the hat. It's what it represents. After all, the red hat is the new white hood for the KKK. Right? But this is the real reason why I truly wanted to talk about this story. Media bias. We all know it's there. You would think, after a story like this, which has essentially ruined the life of at least Sandman, at least this one kid, at least the kids from this school who are trying to apply to a college to go to after they graduate, they're mailing, they're sending all kinds of hate mail and phone calls and so on and so forth to try to get these colleges to deny their applications because of the fact that they were in this school. You're seeing all of this play out, and you would think after the truth comes out and they realize just how much damage they've done to these kids that there would be some level of retraction. And there has been some level of retraction from places like the Washington Post, for example. They issued a correction on that. But senators like Elizabeth Warren have pushed forth this fake news, and others. They have ruined these kids' lives. But there has really been no effort to make amends. You see, this goes far beyond just a simple apology. This goes far beyond just deleting your tweets, which some of them have done, by the way. They've just deleted the tweets. They haven't really issued an apology, but they have deleted a couple of the initial tweets. Oh, well, now you've earned back your credibility, haven't you? What this has shown, really, is how truthful Joy Behar's responses are. And it shows how little the mainstream media truly cares about advancing truth. If you just go to places like CNN and the Huffington Post, just to their main pages, these are some of the headlines you'll see. Trump tries to rebound after a horrible day. Let's see. How Pelosi broke Trump analysis. I wish this never happened. Republicans lament Trump's handling of the shutdown, which we will get into later in the broadcast. Let's see. You have Roger Stone talking about him and his indictment. You have, let's see here, 9 dead, hundreds are missing as rescuers scour mud after Brazil dam collapse. And several other stories as well, but not a whole lot on the Catholic schools. Or if you go to the Huffington Post and you look at some of the things that they have put out just over the weekend. Number 1 story, President Pointless. Also top story, Nancy Pelosi knocks Trump. What does Putin have on the president? Michael Jackson document on child sex abuse charges leaves crowd shocked. Roger Stone claims indictment fabricated. What we know about when federal workers will return and when they'll be paid. Kentucky Catholic bishop, Trump's MAGA hats are not pro-life. Trump can't find Waldo. Schooled by the speaker. Why are they they're focused solely on Trump. Solely on Trump. Trump, 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 Trump. That's all the news is about. That's all that it's ever been about. They have one goal, and one goal only. Take out this president and subvert the Constitution and subvert American values. And Trump is associated with promoting American values. Trump is associated with trying to reverse some of the policies that have been put in place. Now, whether or not you actually think he's done a good job of that is a whole other story, but this is what the narrative is. This is what they're framing it as. They have to take him down, and they have to take down anyone who supports him. And who are the people that are reading these stories? See, some on the right have tried to make attempts to reach out to the other side, to reach out to the left, and try to find common ground. How are you going to find common ground with a side that only gets one side of the news? And that's not to say that the right isn't guilty of it as well, because they are. But just look at those stories, just on the front page. Their readers are digesting that. They are not going to Fox News. They are not going to The Blaze. They are not going to the Daily Wire. They're not going to Conservative Review. They're not going to any of those places. They are going to CNN, Huffington Post, Politico, MSNBC, and NBC, and other places. They're going to those places. So when this kid goes on one of these one of these morning shows and tries to explain his side of what happened at the protest, the only ones that are watching it are those on the left. And they're watching it having already been indoctrinated with the whole, look at them, they are ambushing this guy. Look at this poor Marine veteran who, by the way, they tried to frame this as Nathan Phillips, this Indian guy who served in Vietnam. No, he didn't. He's a Marine vet, but he was never deployed to Vietnam, so he never went there. Oops, missed that one. And to me, this all comes back to media trust. Do you trust the media? Do you trust the mainstream media? Many people don't. In fact, younger people especially don't trust the media. If you look at a Gallup poll, this was from back in, I think, October, it shows, although it does show that there has been a slowly rebuilding of trust from the older generation, particularly with Democrats and independents, overall, it remains below where it was around the turn of the century, especially with younger people. They just don't trust the mainstream media. And that doesn't mean they trust Fox News, but they don't trust CNN either. If you look at what people are saying about traditional outlets, 72% say traditional outlets report news they know to be fake, false, or purposely misleading. A poll of nearly 4,000 adults shows that 92% of Republicans, which is no surprise, and Republican-leaning independents say that, and about 79% of independents and 53% of Democrats essentially saying the same thing. They all have an agenda. Now, we just kind of take this for granted. We kind of just assume that this is just the way that it has to be. But it's not the way that it has to be. It isn't. We don't have to get our news from just one source. We don't have to trust what somebody says as gospel. And ultimately, people are not going to be convinced. The diehard lefties, the diehard Democrats, those who are just convinced that the president is evil, that Republicans are evil, they want to deny women choices, they want to oppress minorities, they want to do all these awful, awful things. And they've been, again, indoctrinated by the left-wing media. They've been indoctrinated through public universities and the school system. They've been indoctrinated from their liberal friends, who also don't get the news from objective sources. These people are not going to be convinced. No amount of interviews is going to change that. So what do? We have to be responsible, educated people. And what I mean by that is, just go back to the basics. Don't just get your news from one source. Look at the facts from multiple sources. Wait for more evidence to come out, and then form your own opinion. And it's pretty clear from this story that the students, the Covington students, by and large, showed that they were more adults than the actual adults, especially those in the media, who should be held to a higher standard to report the truth and speak on what the facts are, not on what you want them to be. We'll be right back. And we are back and better than ever. Okay, so this government shutdown seems to have ended, at least for the next 3 weeks. And President Trump signed a 3-week spending package, enough to resume government operations through the 15th of next month. This morning, hundreds of thousands of federal employees returned to work to resume their operations after missing paychecks for more than a month during the longest ever government quote-unquote shutdown. But fears of another shutdown loom as the White House and Congress appear to be no closer to a long-term funding deal, despite giving themselves breathing room to negotiate. This is from Fox News. On Monday, Smithsonian museums that were closed during the partial shutdown prepared to reopen this week, as did national parks and other affected federal sites. Numerous federal departments, including Homeland Security, which saw significant disruptions in agencies such as the Transportation Security Administration, were back in full force. Politico has reported from the Congressional Budget Office that this government shutdown so far has cost the United States $3 billion that it will not recover. The agency projected that an overall $11 billion in losses due to the shutdown over President Donald Trump's border wall will be offset by a projected $8 billion boost for the GDP through the remainder of the year. The agency says, quote, underlying those effects on the overall economy are much more significant effects on individual businesses and workers. Among those who experience the largest and most direct negative effects are federal workers who face delayed compensation, and private sector entities that lost business. Some of those private sector entities will never recoup that lost income. So, this is a tough situation. Because on the one hand, obviously, we don't want people who are working to go without pay. We don't want people who are trying to make an honest day's work, to do an honest day's work for an honest day's pay, to go without said pay. At the same time, we have to understand, and this has been a problem for generations that the government has become far, far too big in scope, far too big in the roles that were granted to it in the Constitution. I mean, we spend hundreds of billions of dollars on, things like healthcare and education and things that, while yes, they are good things, they're not necessarily what the federal government is supposed to fund. But because of politics, that has a lot to do with it, it's just politics. Because of stoking fear in the minds of Americans that if we don't fund these programs, we can't survive as a country. And yeah, sure, we didn't have these programs before, but times have changed and now government needs to step in. Despite the fact that our ratings with math scores in the public education system have gone down, not up, since spending billions on education. Despite all that, we still have to dump more money into these programs. And, I don't want to see anyone furloughed. I don't want to see anyone out of work. I don't want to see anyone working without any pay, and that's what has happened. I think this is a good conversation that we have to have about if we're going to be serious about shrinking the size of government. We have to understand that's going to hurt. That doesn't mean that we leave people on the side of the road. That doesn't mean that we don't try to help people find work elsewhere. But it does mean that a change of employment might be necessary. But of course, Republicans, conservatives can't make that argument because if they do, they are immediately branded as hateful, inconsiderate, heartless people. Because they just want people to be out of work. They want families to be struggling. They just don't care. They don't care. All they care about is money, money, money. Despite the fact that Democrats want to spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on wasteful programs, but not a border wall, which is interesting. And let me just make one thing clear. I don't think that the president has done himself a good service throughout this shutdown situation. Because initially, the government shutdown occurred because Donald Trump wanted a border wall, and Democrats wouldn't give it to him. And he said, I will not reopen the government until we get money for a border wall. We get the funding for it. And immediately, there was intense backlash. Calling the president a racist, calling Republicans who agree with him haters. And then it shifted from that to, well, I'll agree to reopen the government if we extend protections for DACA children. DACA being Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Children of illegal alien parents who were brought here through no fault of their own. So he was willing, whether or not you agree with this idea, he was willing to meet the Democrats halfway. Okay, we'll reopen the government, but you have to give us, you have to be willing to fund the border wall. And if you do that, we'll extend protections for DACA kids. Well, that wasn't good enough. They refused. Nancy Pelosi refused. Democrats refused. And in fact, I have to say, despite what Nancy Pelosi said, there were some Democrats who were very angry with Pelosi, saying, we should just sign this. Sign this agreement, reopen the government, give him the money for the wall. Let's end this charade right now. People need money. People need to get back to work. But Nancy Pelosi is obsessed with her hatred of Donald Trump and is obsessed with her own power. She is a snake in the grass. So, the president seemed to be on his way to a political victory until he caved and said, okay, we'll reopen the government for 3 weeks. Now, it's not a full-on reopening of the government. We're going to be right back here again in 3 weeks. But this is not how you negotiate from a position of strength. When you constantly give in and make compromises to the Democrats. I'm not completely opposed to compromise. But what are they willing to give up? Nothing. The Democrats won't give up anything. They are determined to not give Donald Trump a victory, to not give, quite frankly, the American people a victory. Whether or not you agree with a border wall, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Americans do care about border security. But the Democrats, even though they claim to be for border security, are not willing to listen to Donald Trump on anything. I can't remember his name, but I saw a Democrat come out and say, look, there are cases where a wall does work. We don't necessarily need a wall on the entire border, but there are parts of the border where a wall would be sufficient. And already that sounds like a Democrat that I could sit down and have a conversation with. But unfortunately, that Democrat is not the Speaker of the House. So where will this end up? I don't know. I really don't know. I can predict what's going to happen. I think, sadly, yet again, the president will ultimately cave because the advisors around him will try to tell him that this is an optics issue, and if he constantly refuses to open the government, this will hurt his re-election chances in 2020, and we can just revisit this issue later without hopefully having to have another government shutdown. That's what I think is going to happen. And whether or not we will actually fund amnesty, I don't know. I think if that happens, Trump will not only cave to the Democrats' demands, he will shoot himself in the foot with his base. So, I don't think that is... I think that can happen, but I don't know if it will happen. But the very idea that Donald Trump is willing to get to this place of extending DACA protections, I think is rather unfortunate because, DACA is one of those things that, quite frankly, is unconstitutional. It's something that Barack Obama did that I strongly disagreed with. When it comes to immigration, my thinking is, if you were brought here by your parents illegally, then you should go back to your country and come in the legal way. But again, as with other issues, we can't have that conversation because you're immediately deemed a racist, you are deemed a bigot, you're deemed as someone who wants to oppress children, oppress their families. But I'm thinking, well, you're more than willing to slaughter unborn children in the womb, so how is this completely heartless in comparison? Well, if you don't understand that, it's because, well, you just aren't smart enough to understand it. So, as this debate continues forward, we will update you with what happens in the future and where this goes from here. I'm sure we will revisit this topic in 3 weeks' time. But it's just, it's a reminder to me of how important it is. If you truly believe in the principles of this republic, if you truly believe that government needs to be limited in scope to what the Constitution says, if you truly believe that we need to be a moral, upright, responsible people, the fight is not going to be easy. It's going to be worth every bit of blood, sweat, and tears that you have to offer, but it's not going to be easy. And we can't just simply put our hope and trust in one person, the President of the United States, to get that job done. We, the people, need to be constantly engaged and constantly informed to make sure that we get the job done, because this is our country. It's our country. It's not just Donald Trump's country. It's not the Democrats' country. It's not Republicans' country. It's our country. And if we want this country to last another generation, if we want our freedoms to last another generation, then we need to step up, and we need to step up right now. One election is not going to change everything. We've got to be engaged constantly. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz. For great radio, get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Alright, so the whole guest thing doesn't look like that's going to work out today, which is okay. But yeah, it's kind of a busy weekend for both of us, and it just didn't work out that we weren't able to record and do an interview together, which is okay. I mean, this topic that I want to talk to you about, I kind of want it just to be you and me anyway. So hopefully we'll have him on in just a couple of weeks. And talk about whatever else is going on at that period in time. So, with the remainder of this show, at least for a good portion of the remainder of this show, I want to talk about the abortion bill, abortion law, that was just made in New York. This is a bill that basically makes abortion legal at any point between conception and birth. And this is one of the most radical bills that I've ever seen in the wake of abortion. And this has created quite a controversy. Thankfully, actually, I'm glad that people are talking about this across the U.S. And what's really sad to me about this whole thing is the fact that we even have to have a conversation about this. The fact that we even have to make the argument that unborn life is still life. The fact that we have gotten to this place in this country where that's now a controversial statement. It's just heartbreaking to me. So, this is some of what the bill looks like. It not only preserves access to abortions, this is from CNN, it also removes abortion from the state's criminal code. This would protect doctors or medical professionals who perform abortions from criminal prosecution. The law also now allows medical professionals who are not doctors to perform abortions in New York. Governor Andrew Cuomo said that the old law had criminal penalties. It was written that the doctor or professional could be held criminally liable. Now the law also addresses late-term abortions. Under New York's Reproductive Health Act, they can be performed after 24 weeks if the fetus is not viable or when necessary to protect the life of the mother. And the idea of this law is that, let's say Roe v. Wade is overturned by the Supreme Court. I guess I don't know how this works, but I guess this law makes it to where you can still do abortions anyway. Because, I mean, and it does make sense because just overturning Roe v. Wade isn't going to make abortion illegal. It just makes it to where you don't have to force it, essentially. I mean, that it still puts it in the hands of the states, is basically what it does. It makes it to where the states now can decide whether or not they want to make it legal or not. Let's see. The bill was first introduced in 2006, but was blocked for consideration by the Republican-controlled state Senate. With Democrats now in the majority, the bill passed the legislature Tuesday night and was signed into law. And the advocates cheer the new law. When this was signed, there was a video that was out of the legislature. When the bill was announced that it was passed, everybody cheered. All the lawmakers in the building cheered. All the pro-abortion people, at least the most radical ones, cheered. Now, in this story, it tries to make the claim that it's in the life of the mother. In the case of the life of the mother, after 24 weeks, you can abort the baby only if the life of the mother is at stake. But that's not what the law says. I've read the law. That is not what it says. Let me see if I can pull this up for you. Let's see here. When it starts talking about abortion, let's see. Furthermore, the legislature declares that it's the public policy of New York State that every individual possesses a fundamental right of privacy and equality with respect to their personal reproductive decisions and should be able to safely effectuate those decisions, including by seeking and obtaining abortion care free from discrimination in the provision of health care. Therefore, it is the intent of the legislature to prevent the enforcement of laws or regulations that are not in furtherance of a legitimate state interest in protecting a woman's health that burden abortion access. But let's see, here's the part where it talks about more than just the life of the mother. Let's see, healthcare practitioner licensed, certified, or authorized under Title 8 of the Education Law, acting within his or her lawful scope of practice, may perform an abortion when, according to the practitioner's reasonable and good faith professional judgment, based on the facts of the patient's case. The patient is within 24 weeks from the commencement of pregnancy, or there is an absence of fetal viability, or the abortion is necessary to protect the patient's life or health. Life or health. Not just life, health. Now, if you're wondering exactly what does that mean by health, well, you'll be hard-pressed to find it in the bill, because it's a very vague term. It's a very vague description. What does that mean, the health of the mother? Well, what many have argued is that it could be due to stress. It could be, I don't want the baby anymore because the father left me and the father's now no longer going to be there and I'm not in a position to where I can raise the baby myself. It's not financially feasible, so therefore you can just abort the baby. I mean, that's essentially where we are. And it is disgusting to me. Disgusting. Now, this is a classic argument that the left makes with abortion, is that, what if the fetus is not viable? Basically meaning, what if it doesn't appear that the baby is going to live? What if it doesn't appear that it won't survive the pregnancy? We can't have that. We can't have that at all. But there are countless stories of babies who were born prematurely or born with, with health problems, health issues, that were treated and survived the pregnancy and are quite healthy today. See, this is just another grasping for straws argument that the left tries to make, and unfortunately the right doesn't do a very good job of confronting this argument. In terms of the abortion argument in general, in terms of the fight that we're trying to have here, liberals love to throw around the word science when it supposedly sides with their argument. But that's not what science is teaching us at all. First off, if we want to go by their logic, science has already shown that a new human being begins at the moment of sperm-egg fusion, otherwise known as fertilization. Sperm and egg by themselves, as we all know, only contain half the genetic material needed to form a human being, but when these cells fuse, a new individual who is genetically distinct from both parents comes into existence. And there's a ton of medical proof that backs this up. It creates human life. Now, whether or not the human being possesses every single quality at the moment of conception, I don't think takes away from the fact that it's still a human life. And, liberals like to argue, well, what about the heartbeat? Or, well, what about memories? What about all these things? That's merely a stage in development of a human being. Merely a stage. At the moment of fertilization, you're already getting eye color, you're already getting hair color, what it's going to look like, you're already getting, you're already getting different qualities that start at the moment it begins to fertilize. It's not like it's just a clump of cells that aren't doing anything. They're developing. It's developing into a human life, into a fully formed baby. Fully formed baby. Now, we liberals would not make this argument about animals. They would not make this argument, well, you can just kill it. No, it's a life. It's an animal. But they seem to be all too willing to make this argument as it relates to a human being. So, where does this go? Where does this abortion debate head? I mean, I know I just said that it's important to make the right argument, but will we convince anyone, even? Who are the people that are willing to truly sit down and discuss this, who are normally on the pro-abortion side? I don't see very many people. Now, I do see people who are normally as they call themselves, pro-choice, who are upset by this bill, but to me it seems like a double standard. At what point, then, is a clump of cells a human life? They have no consistent argument to make. None. It's all development arguments. I mean, yeah, sure, a heartbeat is another evidence of human life, but that's not the only evidence. And really, this whole thing goes back to what have we become as a society? We are so obsessed with our own human reason, which changes all the time. And we, not only that, have turned this into a political issue in which people are not willing to hear anything from the other side, not willing to have a conversation. And when we do try to have a conversation, it resorts to name calling. And this, I tell you, abortion, it's murder. It is murder. You are killing an innocent human life. When doctors perform abortions, it's very brutal how those babies are killed. You've probably heard the stories, but whether it's a hypodermic needle that's plunged into the belly of a pregnant woman. It fills it with acidic poison. It squirts it into the fluid that surrounds the baby, fills the baby's tiny lungs, and burns the baby entirely, inside and out. That's just one method of aborting a baby. Another method is the spear-like suction tubes that ram into the baby's head, suck out its brains. That way, it can then crush the baby's skull and drag it out of the body, drag it out of the mother more easily. Does that sound humane to you? Apparently it sounds humane to those in New York, and frankly, many others across the country. Well, let me just end with this. Been spending a lot of time in the Bible lately. Been reading in the book of Isaiah and Ecclesiastes, and just reading the book of Isaiah, just the first couple chapters, it is a chilling reminder what happens to a nation and what happens to a people that turn their hearts away from God, that start celebrating what used to be considered evil and celebrating it as though it's good, and otherwise rejecting things that we used to consider good because we now think it's evil. And this is throughout Scripture. It talks about this. But one of my favorite passages, not because it's uplifting, but because it is humbling, is from the book of Isaiah, chapter 5, verse 20. It says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness." We are barely a month into 2019, and we are already begging for God to strike us down. We have exemplified the worst in humanity. Now, I am still convinced that there are many, many more people who do not approve of this. But there are plenty who do. And God could really do what he wants at any time. But let me just end by saying this to all those in New York, to all those across the country who have promoted this kind of policy, voted for this kind of policy, supported it on social media, and so on and so forth. There is a hell. It does exist. God does exist. God is sovereign, and he will not be mocked. You can sit there and laugh. You can sit there with a smirk on your face, thinking that you've won. But you're only doing the work of Satan. That's all you're doing. And if you think you have any power over him, oh, that will be the worst and last mistake you'll ever make. That's not a threat. That is just simply stating you don't know what kind of fire you're playing with. You don't even begin to understand what kind of fire you're playing with. But this is the kind of nation that we are becoming. And another example of this, I know I'm going over a little bit on my time here, but Chick-fil-A now being accused by a radical leftist cult group on campus of being a white supremacist, I'm trying to remember all the adjectives that they use, but a capitalist cult, essentially. And obviously this is a fringe group. But Chick-fil-A has been driven out of universities before. They were just driven out of I think it was Rider University. It was a university in New Jersey. And they were driven out because their values weren't progressive enough. Oh, I'm so sorry. We only serve everybody. I'm sorry that's not inclusive enough for you, but we only serve everybody at this restaurant. I mean, people can't just let others have an opinion. People can't just let others have a belief, because those beliefs trigger them. They trigger them because they are leftists, they are full of hate, and quite frankly, many of them are full of Satan. They are allowing Satan to have victory over their lives, and that's why they act the way they do. And because of that, they have to shut down anyone who believes differently. I know that seems like I've, boiled it down too much, but honestly, that's what it really comes down to. That's what sin comes down to. You are allowing the devil to have victory over your life. All this to say, whether it's the abortion thing, whether it's Chick-fil-A, whether it's prayer being allowed in schools, whether it's trying to serve in a federal position and being grilled by a United States Senator over the fact that you believe in one God and that those who don't serve that God won't make it to heaven. Oh, what a radical belief. That's only been the belief of Christians for thousands of years. If we really think we as a nation will be able to avoid God's judgment, that God isn't serious when he talks about sin, read the book of Isaiah. Read about it. Read what happens to a nation, God's chosen people, that turns away from him. If God is willing to be that harsh with a nation, with a people that are his chosen people, what do you think he thinks of us right now? Do you think he's more or less willing to pour out that same judgment and wrath upon us? It's another reminder for each of us, myself included, that we have to be firmly rooted in Christ. That's the only way to truly live. It's the only fulfilling way to live. Everything else, it's empty. It's meaningless. And on that note, that's going to do it for the show today. I know it's not the most cheerful way to end, but these are not necessarily cheerful times right now. These are times where we really have to come together as Christians and tell the truth and stand firm in the faith. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and hopefully we'll see you back here on next Monday's program. Till then, stay safe and God bless.